Greetings, everyone. My name is Dave Gruber. I am a principal analyst with the Enterprise Strategy Group, and today we're going to be talking about one of the fundamental building blocks of cybersecurity programs, and that is vulnerability management. Now, if you're thinking there's been so much written and so much said about vulnerability management, and hey, what is there more to say about it? I want to tee this up with the right way today. Vulnerability management, while fundamental, and while we all have a vulnerability management program, few of us would say that our vulnerability management program is excellent or maybe at the standard that we would like it to be. And so this session is to drill in and take a look at maybe how to think a little differently about vulnerability management and to tee up some techniques, some strategies, and some approaches to think about escalating the success of our vuln program and making it a stronger part of our security. Joining me today is Steve Osepik from DeepSeas. Steve is an innovation leader there. Steve focuses on vulnerability management at DeepSeas. Steve, say hello to us and tell us just for a moment who DeepSeas is.
Hi, it's great to talk to you. And yes, DeepSeas is a managed security provider, and we work together with our clients to build programs. I spend a lot of time working on vulnerability management and building offensive security programs there with our clients. We do managed detection and response. We're very good at that, and running tools and keeping everything going and building programs. So I'm glad to talk with you today, Dave. It's great to be here.
Excellent. Thanks, Steve. Hey, so I want to start out by just for a minute talking about some research that I do. So every year I do an annual security operations study. And every year I ask security operations leaders, directors, and CISOs participate in these studies about their big challenges. And interestingly, every year, roughly half people tell me that security operations continues to be more difficult today than it was a couple of years ago. And at the top of that list for several years standing now is the growing attack surface, the diversity of the attack surface. And go figure, right? The environment around us is fluid, it's in motion, the ground is moving. A number of other issues pop up here, including, of course, the increasingly more complex cloud and threat landscape, more cloud usage, lots of security tools. But the attack surface itself sits at the top. And when you drill down on that subject, you find out that one of the very top reasons why that frustrates people is there's more vulnerabilities to manage. More devices, more assets, more workloads, more multi-cloud environments that I have, the more alerts I have about vulnerable systems, whether it be software vulnerabilities, configuration vulnerabilities, lots of different vulnerabilities. And right, so this continues to put pressure on our vulnerability management programs. Then, so you see here, almost half said that they have mediocre vulnerability management programs where some of their attack surface is covered, but they have coverage issues that expose them in other areas. And so I wanted to start out with a fairly simple diagram here, but one that sort of sets the stage, and that is something I call security strategies and the threat funnel. This is a model that I've put together over a number of years at Enterprise Strategy Group, and it's to think about as threats come upon us. Our security strategies are layered, right? We all know that we have layered security controls, but at the very top of our security strategies is the notion of attack surface reduction or attack surface management, and a core component of that is our vulnerability management program. So the better job we can do here, right at the top of the threat funnel, in reducing our attack surface, in reducing the amount of vulnerabilities that we have in play, the better we're going to do as we move down through our layered security strategies. So this is a core component, and one of the big reasons we want to drill into this conversation and talk more about it. Let's just talk about the subject of vulnerability management. And Steve, help me attach this to the notion of risk. Risk is a big subject in cyber today, and we're all moving towards more risk-centric cybersecurity strategies. You guys work with companies of all different sizes and
Right.
scopes in your MDR services, but also
Mhm.
in all of your different assessment services, much of which is focused on the identification and mitigation of risk. Level set for me here. When I think about vulnerability management, one of my key objectives is to meet my audit requirements, right? Because I have a lot of audits and I need to make sure that I'm meeting my objectives, especially if I'm in a regulated industry. But let's go above that and let's just talk about the broader subject of risk.
Right, absolutely. No, I think, and you lined it up really well with talking about attack surface and attack surface reduction. This is an aspect of the space we hadn't really seen, coming to the forefront until recently. Maybe the last 5 years, we've really been talking about attack surface reduction, but that's because of the phenomenon that I think you started to talk about, which is just the sheer volume of vulnerabilities. Every exposed service can generate 100 to 200 vulnerabilities, depending on how you have it set up, right? And how many things are wrong with it, according to the scanners. So it is, and the number of vulnerabilities that we're aware of and exploits in the field has only grown over time. If you think about when a lot of our audit requirements started, think about back in maybe the late 90s, early 2000s timeframe, when MITRE had begun the taxonomy. There's a CVE taxonomy, right? And things were, maybe you would do a scan and you'd have 24 vulnerabilities, 12 vulnerabilities, 30 vulnerabilities. Boy, we're having a bad week, right? It was a whole different thing that we made our audit concepts around, and our critical high, medium, low concept, right? It's something that is based on if you have 50 of something, 100 of something, maybe. But what I see my clients struggling with is 100,000 of these, right? 200, 250,000, 500,000. I've seen 1.7 million, I think is the top I saw. So it's and maybe more than that, actually, now that I think about it. It's okay. Everybody has that problem. I think that's where we have to start. And then we have to break down some of the assumptions that got us here, focus on volume, take some tricks out of the MDR playbook, right? And that's all to what you said, exactly right, aligned to risk. Reduce the footprint, align it to actual risk where we know that we're not going to get them all, but we can get a lot of them and we can get the important ones.
Yeah, so talk to me more about how we need to think about risk. Many of us have dedicated people in our organizations that have titles, that have risk management titles, risk mitigation titles. Their staff focused on that aspect of the business. Certainly in cyber, it's just another day in the life of as a cyber pro, how we think about this. But as we think differently about risk, so to your point, there's a lot of risk in the world, but what risk do we really need to pay attention to? So what are some of the key vectors that we need to think about when we think about risk that changes this equation from hundreds of thousands, tens of thousands, millions, whatever it is, down to something where we know what we should focus on, and it's something that's actually achievable?
I've always liked the follow the money approach. And the money approach is essentially, what vulnerabilities are attackers getting the most use out of, right? Those are the most likely, if you're talking about risk, think about it. Is it more likely that a recently reported, privately reported vulnerability with a CVSS of 10, but a description that says it's bad, trust us? Like, is that the one we focus on, or the CVSS 7.7 that has been weaponized for 10 years, that is part of the Metasploit framework that everybody uses, right? That's the follow the money concept. Are there exploits available? Are red teamers, are real attackers using exploit kits to target these vulnerabilities? So when you really look at risk understands the money concept, right? And you study vulnerabilities through the lens of who's using them, who's getting use out of these, how many people are getting use out of these. That changes the equation considerably. And the good news is, in 2025, and this has been around for quite a few years now, actually, we have the CISA KEV, the known exploited vulnerabilities list, which gives us a list of the vulnerabilities that law enforcement officers, federal law enforcement, is finding within organizations that are being hit by things like ransomware, right? That goes into this nice piece of business we have called the KEV that we can download and ingest in order to get some of that intel I'm talking about.
I'm going to just take this up one level briefly, which is to think about this from a process perspective. So So this notion of identifying risk and prioritizing and going out and mitigating long lists of things to do, that's not a new approach, right? So that's a process we all have, and it's been in place. When you go in and you engage with a client, how do you go through this reset? What you're describing so far is honestly a little bit, to me, a little bit of a ho-hum. It's like, okay, sure, I've heard about all these things. These aren't new ideas. These aren't new concepts. You're approaching this somewhat differently than just saying, sure, here's all these data sets, just pour them all in and magically it comes out with a short list of things that I should focus on. Tell me more about a more holistic perspective. When you engage with a client, you go in, I'm sure you share the same story with them and you tell them some of these details and they're like, oh, that's great, there's more work for me to do because now I have to go out and look at more of these pieces and parts
Right,
in this data. Yeah.
right. Yeah, no, absolutely. So the what we focus on is that remediation. There's a lot of, to your point, and it's a very good point. There's a lot said in the market about risk and prioritization of vulnerabilities. It's not new to your, and actually I myself have been doing that for a decade, right? All of us have been doing that for a while. The concept of using CTI, cyber threat intelligence, with the vulnerabilities is newish. I would say it's not new either. I've been doing that for a long time, but we're starting to see people do that more piece. That's like the way to really fix the problem. Here's the issue, right? And you got this all set up. Thank you. You have all of this knowledge about your vulnerabilities. You have 100,000 of them. You need to figure out which one to focus on. And number two, and number three, and number four, right? If you go into work that Monday, what am I working on remediating? There's 100,000 of them. Which ones? That's what I and the organ and all of the organizations and all the teachers of vuln management are looking to solve, is that that person can log into a system and say, or look at a sheet or however the process works, and say, these are the ones I need to work on based on a combination of factors. Not going to critical, high, medium, low, and SLAs. There's too many of them. We need to make it more like MDR, where we get as much information as possible. So where my approach would, and our approach, and I think modern vuln management approach, looks very different than the old approach, is I'm not so interested in the critical, high, medium, low thing. I think criticals are based contextually on what are the most important things to fix right now. And then we just generate a machine, an engine, a workflow that always focuses on that, not unlike software development.
Okay, so you just said a couple of things that really struck my interest. One was potentially you are leveraging some things that we're all familiar with. Well, so one is you of course you're in the MDR business, but as we think about sort of the day-to-day grind of security operations and the detection and response engine that many of us have operating either within our environments or we're working together with a third party like DeepSeas to provide an MDR service on. There are some patterns of operations that are there, and then the other process that you just brought up was not all that unlike, you said, the software development process, which is a sprint based process, right? Which is we're going to attack the lowest hanging fruit, the things that we believe will have the most impact. We're going to iterate on that rapidly and continue to reassess and reprioritize based on the mitigation activities, the risk management activities that we're working on from time to time. So I'm going to just stop there for 2 seconds and come back to it, and then I'm going to use, because I just wanted to set this up. You have a pretty straight up process, right, that you utilize for vuln management, and maybe everybody's going to say, sure, that's what everybody does, but you're trying to simplify this thing to make it more approachable, more manageable, and then you're going to apply some of the learnings, and you've talked to me about this in advance, about the things that you have learned in refining your MDR service, and then you pulled through some threads from software development too that all sort of fit into this basic model. Take us through
Sure.
these four major building blocks of vulnerability management, and then pull in these threads from other areas, which has helped you come up with this approach.
Absolutely. Thank you. That's great. Great setup. This find, rank, assign, fix, kind of a, I don't know if it's a mnemonic but it's essentially boiling down everything. The four phases that we've seen in vuln management, right? In vulnerability management programs. And you can spend time in each of these domains, and you can think about it as like the ability of your program, the workflow, the engine, if you will, which is your vulnerability management program can grow if you intentionally focus on these four areas. Find and rank are the most commonly focused on. Find is where you get your scanners, anything that's a technology that produces a lot of vulnerabilities or a laundry list of them is going to show up in find. Even pen tests, in a way, show up in find because those are manual and those still produce a lot of results. And we can consider the results of pen tests when they're conducted in a way where they actually prove the actual vulnerabilities. We can consider those higher fidelity. Right. So find has some interesting things in it we don't always think about, but most of the time it's the scanners, Tenable, Qualys, Rapid7, and CrowdStrike Defender, and all of them right now too with EDR, right? We can come back to that. Ranking is what we just talked about, CTI, taking threat intel, combining it with the vulnerabilities. Which ones are the most important to fix today? Let's follow the money. What are the threat actors using? How many exploits are there out there? And how exposed are these things, right? Something in there, rank. But then assign and fix usually get neglected. Assign is the workflow, very, very important. Who's going to do something about it, right? Okay, we have this 10 to 15 to 20 top vulnerabilities per resolver group. Okay, that's an assignment concept. You have resolver groups. These are groups of folks who can actually fix them. It might be somebody that controls the patch management solution that's on all the systems, right? That would be a resolver group because they have the ability to push a button and deploy a patch. That would be a resolver group, but it can also be the caretakers of an application, right? A developer can be part of a resolver group if the finding has to do with the code that the organization wrote. And then the fixing side is all of the support and help and frankly just positivity to keep going and fix this, and then we'll get the next set. Because what we're really doing here, frankly, is de-escalating a bit. You know, if you go into vuln management, like I said, and you see, 100,000 vulnerabilities, and your job is to reduce all the criticals, and 30,000 of those are critical, you're going to lose a lot of momentum. Let's say it that way. And it's very disheartening. So this is a process where we can iterate and always focus on the most important vulnerability, right? That's the point. You had also brought up the MDR thing, and keep me, jump in anytime, but the MDR piece and tie-in is I realized when we're doing it this way, when we're combining threat intel with this large group, you could argue unmanageable sized list of vulnerabilities in 2025, unmanageable directly. We then use threat intelligence and artificial intelligence in some cases. I'm trying real hard not to throw the AI word around. I'm being a rebel, but there's absolutely 100% AI ML routes inside of that path. I believe we can take it even simpler than AI ML to start and just follow the money by looking at where people are exploiting things. Like if we do that, right? We're creating this engine within the organization that we can just build on, if you will. And that's something that's different, I think, very different about the approach, gives you more of an empowered feeling versus being buried in vulnerabilities.
Can't argue with any of that. So that feels really solid.
And I missed the hook, didn't I? The hook is it looks just like
No,
MDR in slow motion. That's the
no,
hook.
like, but you said that to me earlier,
Okay.
Steve. You said
Yeah.
that to me earlier,
Yeah.
and like, so bring some clarity to that statement, though.
Yeah.
What do you mean by that?
Well, and that's where I was going. It's just so it's but it's a great concept, right? Because if you think about it, you're ingesting all these vulnerabilities, you're producing all of this intelligence, and you're correlating it. What are you doing at the MDR layer? Millions of alerts, correlating with threat intel, correlating with AI/ML, doing some work at the analyst level to lasso and curate all this stuff, right? That's Vuln management, just higher speed, right? Good vuln management is now looking a lot more like MDR. The MDR-ification, if you will, of vuln management is just that the volume of vuln management has gotten so high that we've then tried to change the other side of the equation, reduce your attack surface, which ones really matter, which ones are really exposed, right? And find that little thing in the Venn diagram to say, these are the ones we want to work on. That's what you see. Everything in vuln management right now is about reducing that horrendous pile of vulnerabilities and making it something that I can actually manage.
For me, that makes and interestingly, we don't always think about the vuln management process as a SecOps function. There's so often been sort of the IT organization and the security folks work together to tackle vuln management. SecOps has owned vuln assessment for some time, usually some more dedicated people, not the detection and response people. But as detection and response has become more of a risk driven activity, what I do know is that in my recent research with security operations, bringing in the risk equation has been a top priority for the core analytics engines, right? So instead of just analyzing, hey, is this a threat? It's like, well, is this a threat that I should care about, or is this a threat that matters a lot to me, or maybe only matters a little to me? So it's more than just. This is interesting because it's more than just driving the vulnerability management prioritization process. It also helps drives the SecOps detection and response processes too, because we're talking about the same thing. When you said, does this matter to me and how much does this matter to me? Well, that goes both in the detection and response. I got an alert for a potential threat. Should I rush out to fix that? Or same is true in the vulnerability space. I now have a vulnerability. Should I rush out to fix that? So I feel like at some level, these agendas are coming together. They're merging. I'm seeing this from the platform vendors for sure, who are starting to bring the pieces and parts together here. So we have reciprocal visibility, whether you're dealing with day-to-day threat alerts as a SecOps function, or you're in the crunch for burning down the outstanding vulnerabilities list. You see, where are the threats flowing through? These agendas are really getting very, very close. And then the notion of reactive versus proactive, as we think about, sort of the overall security strategies, way back up at the high level again here, like, what are my cybersecurity strategies in my company? My ability to more proactively mitigate potential risk, because for the most part, vulnerabilities are about potential risk, right? Versus, attacks that are happening in the STAR-DR space are more of like real, sort of under threat now. The more we can do, back to my funnel that I put up originally here, the more we can do at the top of the funnel to mitigate or proactively slow down the potential of risk, the less time we are chasing threat actors, and the fewer people, hopefully, that we have to apply to go back and work on that. So one other connection before we get off this process topic, and that is this notion of sprints. So this was novel for me, that you hooked these pieces together, and you said, hey, Dave, in traditional app dev, we think about this sprint model. So let's make a hard comparison for people, so people get the notion of why we're thinking differently there.
Absolutely, absolutely. No, and thank you. Think of it this way: we have change windows, right? And we have time set aside for applications to get updated, maintenance windows. Security can ride in that same conveyance, right? It can ride in that same car, because it's also improvements to the code, but these are security improvements. You can also marry the concepts of software development from a security perspective to security sprints. So I have clients doing vulnerability management sprints where we get together and we sort of have our campaigns. We know which vulnerabilities are being targeted the most by threat actors. We know which ones pose us the most risk. Some of those we get the patch done right away. Others take multiple sprints, but we come together and we take notes, and we sometimes use other tactics like pen testing to shine a light on something. But this is how we manage, just like an agile software development team. Um, and it really brings that sanity because software development is used to this infinite backlog problem. If you've ever worked in a software development team or been a software engineer, you know there's usually something like, in my day, Rally was a big one with me, and Agile, and there was always just, if you had time, there were tickets, there were user stories. Same with vuln management, infinite backlog. So how do you make sense of that? You structure it with a reasonable amount of time, and you align it to the change windows, and you plan it out, and you start slicing off the top of that risk. And when you get that repeatable, it creates a lot of momentum, and you'd be surprised at how fast you can reduce vulnerabilities if you start aligning with the team that way.
Steve, this is really compelling for me, and like for me, this is a huge aha to what you were talking about here, because so much of the nitty gritty details of what we talked about here, are things that people have been grappling with for a long time. But this is a fundamentally different process approach to the problem. You've had this weirdly unique the lifetime of experiences that have sort of led you to recognize the opportunity to apply these techniques to help solve these problems. Now you're working for a company who is both a service provider and an advisor, right? So I know in our conversations, one of the things that was compelling to me is your objective as a company has been, sure, we want to go help people learn this model, gain control of what's happening in their environment, implement effective vulnerability management, but not necessarily you do all that for them for the rest of their lives.
Right.
Is that you are advisors, you are coaches too. Tell us more about the sort of coaching element of what you guys are doing.
Absolutely. And it's interesting because you do have to take a very intentional approach to this. Are you teaching? Are you selling wisdom? Are you selling a thing, right? A product. Our services are based around, you could do it, but we can do it better because we're doing it all the time, right? But you know enough that you know why it's good. If that makes sense. So vulnerability management is a funny space because it's not really the exciting thing that pen testing is. It's kind of the little scrappy, annoying younger brother to pen testing, right? And in the offensive security pantheon. But it's a foundation layer. So I always think of it as basement waterproofing, frankly. It's not that exciting, right? But if you need it, it's very important. If you come downstairs and there's a lot of water on the floor and you're ankle deep, you're thinking, boy, I would have spent some time on basement waterproofing. It's that thing. It's that preventive. It's unfortunately the preventive side of our space, which is harder because there's less adrenaline. It's more like in between the events, in between the incidents. What do you do? Vulnerability management. You make it so that the attackers don't have an easy time. You patch holes in the wall. You find things that an attacker could exploit. And we've been telling ourselves we don't have to do this for a long time. Well, now it's time to do it, right? It's that energy against the infrastructure. And it does use pen testing. It's just that it's combined between what we can find manually and what we can find through automated tools. And we just keep improving it as long as we can. That allows us to build on top of it an MDR program. One last comment with that. We don't want to make our MDR folks defend against a system that's porous. That's a lot of work. You need to spend a lot more on MDR if you're not going to spend much on vuln management, because vuln management is going to allow things to bounce off. It's like an immune system. Whereas MDR is catching things when they do land. That's more like your white blood cells, I guess, right? And maybe those two don't work together because both are part of your immune system. But maybe I could break it down further. I don't know. There's some analogy in there somewhere. But you see what I'm saying. Yeah.
How about I share a picture that maybe puts it
Please.
into
Yes.
a visual here.
This is
So
perfect.
I'm going to
Yes.
go back to my threat funnel that I started with here, and we're basically putting our threat funnel on a diet here. We're trying to get skinnier in the middle, and that's exactly what you just described, right? Which is the more proactive we and the better job we do up front with attack surface reduction, the less white blood cells we'll need lower down in the funnel, to your analogy here, right? So we're gonna make it easier on the people intensive function, by the way, this reactive function, right? Detection response, incident response, and God forbid we get, which we do, to recovery, when something makes it all the way through. These are really people intensive functions. They're expensive, and again, we're getting better, sure, with all the advancements in Gen AI and AI capabilities. Sure, things are going to get better, but the better we do at the top, the less we force down the funnel, so it gets skinnier. It changes the shape of the threat funnel and increases our security posture overall. The better job we do at the front of this guy here. Steve, thank you so much for your insights. This is I'm weirdly like all motivated now to run out and sort of spend more time and investment in at the top here.
You've inspired me as well. Your slide made me think about something I can complete the analogy now. Vuln management is washing your hands using clean, right? Cleanliness. And it's great because it's boring. Vuln management can be boring, but it's actually quite interesting if you do the security research side. But the washing your hands, taking care to always be clean and keep your countertops clean and all that, that's vuln management. Your immune system is more like your MDR provider, and it's going to stress out your body a little bit right there. I think that's where it lives.
I love that. I love that. And on that note, thank you so much for joining me in this
Thank
conversation.
you. Yeah.
I know you guys are at the ready to help people learn more about your innovative approach to vulnerability management. And I really appreciate the insights you brought with us today. So thanks very much.
Thanks, Dave. It's great to talk to you.